Let us bow our heads for a moment and pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. May you speak to us either through me or in spite of me, and let us hear the whisperings of your Spirit deep in our hearts. Amen. John Ortberg, the writer and theologian, tells a beautiful story. He says, "Some years ago, my wife arranged for us to ride in a hot air balloon as a birthday gift. He says, we went onto the field where the balloons ascended and got into a little basket with one other couple. We introduced ourselves and swapped vocational information. So it's John and his wife and another couple and the pilot. And then our pilot, he says, began the ascent. The day had just dawned. It was clear, it was crisp, it was cloudless, a perfect day. We could see the entire valley. We could see far. It was scenic, inspiring, and majestic. And then he goes on, he says, but I also experienced one emotion I had not anticipated. Want to guess? Fear. I had always thought those baskets went about chest high, but this one only got up to our knees. So one good lurch would be enough to throw someone over the side. So I held on with grim determination and white knuckles. I look over to my wife, who does not care for heights at all, and relaxed a little bit, knowing that there was someone in the basket more tense than I was. I could tell because she would not move at all. During a part of our flight, there was a horse ranch on the ground directly behind us. I pointed to it because she loves horses, and I said to her, aren't they beautiful? She simply rolled her eyes, looked straight forward, and said, yes, it's beautiful. About this time, I decided I'd like to get to know the kid who was flying the balloon. I realized that I could try to psych myself up into believing everything would be fine. But the truth was that we had placed our lives and our destinies in the hands of this young man. Everything depended on his character and competence. I asked him what he did for a living and how he got started flying hot air balloons. I was hoping that his former job to be one of full responsibilities, something like a neurosurgeon perhaps, or maybe an astronaut who missed space. So I knew that we were in trouble when his response to me began with, dude, it's like this. He did not even have a job. He mostly served. He said the reason he got started flying hot air balloons was that he had been driving around in his pickup when he'd had too much to drink, crashed a truck, and badly injured his brother. His brother still couldn't get around too well, so watching hot air balloons gave him something to do. By the way, he said, if things get a little choppy on the way down, don't be surprised. I've never flown this thing before. So my wife looked at me and said, you mean that we are 1,000 feet up in the air with an unemployed surfer who started flying hot air balloons because he got drunk? So the wife of the other couple looked at me and spoke the only words either of them were to utter throughout the whole flight. She said, "You're a pastor. Do something religious." And I said, "Let's take up an offering." The story of Joshua is something like this. Can you imagine a few 100,000 people and Joshua the pilot who had to take them across the Jordan? He had never done this thing before. The only thing that he did before was to spy and then wandering around in the desert. Now he had to take all of them across to the promised land. All their lives depend on him. And yes, Joshua, please do something religious. Please do something that will give us some assurance of where we're going. You see, everything in this little picture in our Old Testament lesson is about change. Changes. It was a change from Moses to Joshua, the change from the desert to the promised land, the change from wandering to settling down, from purposelessness to purposefulness, from manna to honey. And here they stand before a life-changing event. Either go back or go through. They couldn't go around. There was no way that they could go on a bridge. There were no bridges. The river was in flood. And yes, the pilot was Joshua. Joshua, who had to navigate this huge change in everybody's lives. How do you change? And when we talk about that this afternoon, let's think about changes. You see, everyone wants changes in their lives. People talk about changes. People talk about, I would like to change my job or my circumstances or my relationship with people. And yes, very few do change. Many people do enjoy their stuckness in the mud, their stuckness in the desert. They can see the new land. They can see the promised land. But oh my goodness, the river in flood makes them fearful. Change only becomes reality when we are tired enough of being stuck. Only when we reach that point, when we're so tired of the desert, that we will just go forward and that we have that push that pushes us forward into the new land. Because in our nature, we don't like to change. So many of us are like John Ottberg and his wife, stuck in a hot air balloon. And we're also looking for a Joshua to do something religious, something that would give us hope. When we look at this beautiful story in Joshua 3, we see that Joshua did three things to ensure that change, to ensure them to land safely in their hot air balloon. The first that he did was he activated leadership. He activated leadership. What Joshua actually wanted them to do, when he went back to his people, he organizes them, he 12 people were chosen as leaders, and then he chooses those people who could really go forward, go in front. But then he did something else. He made them leaders of their own change. He gave them the responsibility. When you see this, do this. Don't just talk about change. Don't just dream about change. Be the agent of change to become a leader of your own change. Become the leader of the change you want. How did he do that? How did he make them into becoming leaders of their own change? They had to make a decision to go into the new land. They had to make a decision, a quality decision. I don't want to stay in the desert anymore. I want to be where God wants me to be. A quality decision. The second, they had to take responsibility for themselves. You see, sometimes we want God to do everything. God, we want change. Please change this and please change that. And we want God to do all the miracles in our lives. And God becomes a sort of a miracle worker. And we sit back. But Joshua says, no, if you want to go, if you want to have change in your lives, you be the agent of the change. Do the possible, and then God will do the impossible. But do the possible with passion and determination. Make a decision. Take responsibility. Again, if you want change, become the leader of the change you want. A leader takes responsibility. A leader takes risks. The second that he did, he had them following the ark. He fixed their gaze. You see, he organized the Levites, the priests, to take the ark on their shoulders and carry the ark through to the middle of the Jordan. Remember, the Jordan was in flood. Remember, it is that time of the year that there's a torrent, there's a flood of water. It's unstable. No one will just walk into water. No one in his right mind will do that. But they had them, those leaders had to take the first step. They had to walk into that torrent, that rage of water. And the people had to put their gaze on the right place. It's actually two things that he did. He gave them the word of God. He ensured them, if you read a bit earlier in that chapter, he said to them, tomorrow God is going to do the impossible, but you have to follow the ark. They heard the words of the Lord. They took it in. They had the expectation from the words of Joshua. He assured them, tomorrow God is going to do fantastic things, things that you've never seen or that you ever could dream about. But when you start walking, lift your gaze. Look at the ark. The same with Peter in the New Testament in the gospel lesson. Peter, the moment he looked at the water, at the storm, he sank. But the moment his eyes were on Jesus, he could walk on the water. Why the covenant of the ark? The covenant, or the ark of the covenant. The ark contained God's words to Moses. It contained Moses, his staff. It contained manna. In that ark was God's reputation. And God's reputation is a covenantal reputation. It's a covenant. It's more than a contract. God puts his reputation on the line. So what did they have to do? They have to lift their gaze to God's reputation. And with that in their minds and in their hearts, not the possibilities, not the impossibilities, not the new country or the new life or the waters of the Jordan, but God. God with his word, his reputation. That is faith. Not the storm, not the waters, but God. Last, they had to take the first step. There were things that God was doing, there were things that they had to do. They had to take that first step. No amount of watching, of believing, of talking, of whatever could have amounted to the first step. We can talk about changes. We can dream about changes. We can sing about changes. But when we have to change, we have to take the first step. I can talk about fitness. I can buy myself the best fitness subscription in the world. I can even employ a fitness trainer. But if I don't go to the gym and start for the first thing, I will never be fit. What is the first step to you? There are as many first steps as there are circumstances of life. Maybe the first step is to offer another forgiveness and reconciliation. Maybe your first step is to let go of anger and resentment. Maybe your life is unmanageable, and the first step is just one of many other steps to get your life in order again. Sometimes the first step is to simply be quiet, be still, and listen. Perhaps yours is to let go of having to be right all the time, to be in control all the time. Maybe your first step means that you no longer let fear dominate your life. Maybe your first step is to risk intimacy and vulnerability. Maybe your first step is to take responsibility for your life. So here we are, at the beginning of a new year. So wonderful. In the East, we have 2 new years. We could make those New Year resolutions twice. If you miss the first time, you always have Lunar New Year to make them again. This has a second chance. Maybe you feel like John Ortberg in his hot air balloon. You know you are in the air. You know you are floating somewhere. And you look at the pilot. Maybe you are the pilot. You say, oh my goodness, I don't know if I can do this. Then do something religious. Something religious is to take that first step and trust God for the rest. All it takes is the first step. Amen.
Please, all